Welcome, Weekend Blog viewers. We're coming to you for a special morning taping. Normally we tape around noon, but per Ari's schedule, we have a morning session just so we can make sure Blogging Heads viewers have new content for this holiday weekend.
Amen.
And we are discussing mostly Obama, FISA, and the Netroots today. And Ari had a great article in The Nation covering this subject, and I thought I'd let you talk about that for a little bit, and we'll jump into the rest of the issues.
All right, thanks, Conn. Good to be with you. My articles in The Nation this week, there were two about how a lot of Barack Obama supporters are using his website and specifically his social networking portal, which they call My Barack Obama or MyBo, to organize protests against the senator's shifting position on the FISA legislation and surveillance warrants and potential immunity for telephone companies accused of illegal surveillance. So what you had was a relatively small group of people get really well organized through the site, and over a period of about 4 days, they built a group called Senator Obama, basically please vote against the FISA bill, get it right. That kind of sort of pleasant but firm group name, and they organized and became the largest self-organized group on the site, basically in a short span, beating out groups that had been there for months or even over a year. And then they're using that network to make noise, to press the candidate, to organize each other, to do blog outreach, to get their word out on Dig. Got a lot of traffic, got coverage not only from The Nation and from blogs, but from by the middle of the week, mainstream media, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal. So basically, at the very time we're hearing so much about Barack Obama trying to appeal to the general election audience, well, however they perceive that to be working, his campaign focusing on all those other themes, he actually has to turn around and have, I think, a deeper conversation with his supporters about this issue, not as a base, partisan, left-right matter, but as a matter of people who strongly support him but care deeply about the Constitution, about the Fourth Amendment, and don't like what they perceive to be a large reversal from him that has not, they say, been well explained. And this video that we're doing today is set to go up on Friday, Independence Day, fittingly. And I understand that by that time the campaign, I'm told, will finally offer a more direct and substantive response to this group. So far, they've only really been dealing with it when prodded by the media.
Neither at a press conference.
Right. Neither the senator nor even his sort of internet staff have directly, substantively responded to what I think, as I write, is a very sophisticated, very well-informed advocacy group.
What I found most interesting about the group was how it recognized what its assets as a progressive messaging machine were, and utilized Dig, utilized wikis, and most interesting, tried to appeal to Keith Olbermann
right.
in his MSNBC Countdown show as a platform of getting their voice and getting their message out. It just shows a self-awareness as to what their assets are and how they can drive a message to try to get things to go their way. Of course, to that end, it was interesting to see as Jane Hampshire put it, the Glendzilla versus Olbermann fight that ended up happening, as Keith Olbermann at first seemed to take it easy on Obama's new position, at least in the eyes of many of the Netroots, and then came around somewhat in a special comment on Monday. But
yeah.
First, before that, before he came around in a special comment, Glenn Greenwald wrote a very pointed, specifically calling Keith Olbermann out, post, which Bill and the Bills talked about last week, basically rehashing that Olbermann, when George Bush was calling for immunity for telecom companies over FISA, that Olbermann called it, literally textbook example of fascism, and said that they were like the bureaucrats of the Third Reich, and that Olbermann then didn't have similar rhetoric for Obama when he did the same thing. Olbermann then, being the good progressive Netroot citizen that he is, responded at Daily Kos. He's a regular Daily Kos diarist, and he responded to Glenn, basically kind of just saying that John Dean, who's a really smart guy and knows these issues, told Keith Olbermann that the legislation was okay, so Keith's for it now. And Glenn responded back, pointing out that this was hardly a convincing case by Olbermann. And Glenn wrote the next day, how can Olbermann accuse me of distorting his commentary and deny that he's rationalizing Obama's support for the bill, and then write the above, which does nothing to justify Obama's support for the bill? That's exactly the mentality I was criticizing yesterday, that Obama should be excused for supporting this assault on the core constitutional liberties and the rule of law, because doing so is necessary to avoid appearing weak on terrorism. Glenn then goes on to talk about one of other of Olbermann's theories, which was that John Dean said that the bill allowed for criminal prosecution while it shut the door for civil liability. And Glenn just thought this was silly. There are many likely reasons for confirming immunity to civil liability, including the heightened difficulty of proving criminal intent, and most importantly the fact that Bush, on his way out, can pardon telecoms from criminal liability but not civil liability. That's why these telecom lawsuits are the only real avenue left to ensure accountability and obtain a legal ruling on what was done. Then after Olbermann's special comment on Monday, Glenn was a bit more generous. He said, Keith Olbermann delivered a special comment last night on Obama's support for the FISA bill, and to his credit attempted to address many of the concerns that had been voiced regarding his prior comments. He seemed to abandon the idea that Obama harbors a secret plan to prosecute telecoms, and instead urged him to adopt and then announce such a plan. So, like you said, Obama's going to have another explanation on Friday, or tomorrow, but so far, as much as Obama supporters seem to have been able to talk to the Obama campaign, are you predicting? Do you think there's going to be a change, that Obama is going to say that he suddenly does not support this FISA compromise, or do you think that he's just going to try to offer a better explanation?
Well, I'm not in the prediction business.
Okay.
But I think that it was a mistake to backtrack on this position. I think that morally and substantively, which is most important, these issues are fundamental to the change that Barack Obama is talking about, and he has said so specifically in the primary: the rule of law, restoring the Constitution, bringing this country back within the law as we still conduct an aggressive fight against terrorists, but not sacrificing the core values that we hold as Americans and the core fundamental rights that are part of our democracy. And so you can no more eviscerate the Fourth Amendment and the rule of law and civil liberties in this fight, in this war, than you can say we're going to cancel elections because it's safer that way. The question of whether it's safer, which in the more minute question of basket warrants, vacuum surveillance, is actually, I think, quite minor, and we can talk about that. But even when there are trade-offs that sometimes arguably are between security and constitutional rights, civil liberties, the fundamental values of the Constitution is non-negotiable. And we've heard that from so many great leaders, I think, throughout history, and we've heard it from some people lately, and Chris Dodd and Russ Feingold holding up that fight. Barack Obama should not be turning on that. And Glenn and many law professors have pointed out, of course, that because he voted against the Protect America Act in August, and now says he's for a bill that ultimately is expected to not only immunize telephone companies before we even get rulings from American courts, which is just a radical, zany approach, because, as many people have said, Congress could always come in after the fact and try to help the companies with judgments, with any costs that they incurred, if you decided after a full vetting and after the courts had ruled that somehow it was too hard a ruling or an unfair ruling against the companies. But to come in and prematurely prevent our courts from even making a judgment is just extremist. And it's a bad precedent, particularly when it relates to such serious allegations of criminal conduct in the White House itself, aided and abetted, allegedly, by a range of companies. So that's the entire substantive moral argument. Then secondly, and I think this is a very interesting piece of this conflict that's playing out on the internet and across the country, is a lot of people think Barack Obama is also making a political mistake. Yes, you have to run to some degree in a different way in a general election, at least in your emphasis. You don't have to change who you are, but you're talking to a larger and different number of voters. Good politicians know how to appeal to a larger group of people. Having said that, on the core issues, particularly security, the most important political imperative is knowing where you stand and conveying a clear worldview and a clear sense of strength to the public. And so what we're also seeing, separate from the substance, is a debate over how this Democratic nominee should make his case, and whether, rather than opening himself up to charges of being weak on security, which we've heard in the Beltway, he is actually opening himself up to being accused of not having a single clear position, a clear worldview. I don't think that's true, by the way, because I think if you take the larger context, Barack Obama does have a great foreign policy platform, a strong group of people around him, and a demonstrated record of judgment on these core issues, particularly with regard to foreign policy in the Middle East. But he does open himself up to those charges, and unnecessarily so, because the Protect America Act in August and the general approach of granting excessive powers to the executive without oversight is actually a clear case, as they'd say in the law. It's not a hard case, it's a clear case where it not only sacrifices civil liberties, but it actually often makes us less efficient. If you read the 9/11 Commission report and you look at our history, government oversight by judges and by multiple branches can be a big boon to efficiency and information sharing and knowing what our government is up to while we wage this important war on terrorists. And so I don't think Barack Obama got this one right, and I think it is exciting and promising that his supporters can say, we support you, we're not undermining you in the general election, but we don't just stop becoming citizens because you're trying to win over swing states. We're going to continue to press you on these issues.
Yeah, let's stay on the specifics of FISA just for a little while here.
Yes.
We didn't see this uproar from the Netroots community until he came out in favor of this compromise that includes telecom immunity. But Obama's been saying all along that he is fine and supports the NSA surveillance program that is really at the core of this issue. A couple days before he announced his support of the compromise, he told Jake Tapper, quote, well, in my mind, I haven't opposed, for example, the National Security Surveillance Program, the NSA program. So Obama's support for, as you put it, the vacuum cleaner NSA program hasn't changed at all. He's always been for that. And I heard you describe that as kind of a side issue, but I think it really is the important issue. And
well, he voted, I mean, I don't want to interrupt you long, but he did vote against the Protect America Act in August.
That's true. But
which was, I think it's fair to say, I mean, this is separate from whether you think that's good or bad, that was the Democratic Congress's first swing of the bat on aspects of warrantless surveillance that the Bush administration had secretly administered without Congress.
Right.
I think that, more than random statements, and especially recent ones, I think that was a very clear test on whether you wanted to validate what the president had done without Congress secretly, and some people say illegally, or not. And he did vote against that. I think that's pretty persuasive.
Yeah, but that's a larger package in a very general statement. Asked specifically about the NSA program by Jake Tapper, Obama said he supported and always has.
And again, he said repeatedly, he spoke out against warrantless surveillance, and in those Glenn Greenwald posts, there's some great quotes. When Dodd endorsed him, he spoke about how we can't do warrantless wiretapping. He's talked about it in the context of the rule and law in Guantanamo. Frankly, you know, you're pointing out that recently he's spoken supportively of it. I think, though, in the larger picture, he has definitely spoken out against warrantless wiretapping and voted against aspects of it.
Right. Well, you know, let's get on this for a second, because you know, in your long speech earlier, you talked about liberties and you know, protecting the Constitution, etc., the Fourth Amendment, and I think it's important for viewers to understand that the FISA issue really has nothing to do with the Fourth Amendment. It has everything to do with a statute passed by Congress, and nothing the president did violated, or the telecommunication companies violated the Fourth Amendment. So when we get this overheated rhetoric about you know, invading people's privacy, etc., the only thing that was possibly violated was the FISA Act, not the Fourth Amendment. And so, you know, when we go and we look at, you know, warrantless surveillance, people think about, oh, their privacy are at stake, but I think we need to talk about really what the program was and what is at stake here. In that, in 1978, when FISA was first passed, basically it still allowed the NSA to suck down satellite and radio stuff from all over the world because it was trying to target foreign communications, and at the time the technology was such that those were through satellite and radio, etc., but that telephone, telegram, etc., were in wires in the United States, and so it required Congress to get required the president to get a warrant from the special court in order to get this done, in order to tap those resources. But of course, since then, technology has changed so that when somebody emails from Pakistan to Afghanistan or Europe to Afghanistan, those emails might just pass through wires within the United States. And so that is the technical fix that is needed within FISA in order to allow the NSA to do what it does. And that is what Obama says he supports. And I think this is a fundamental glossing over of when people talk about this issue, is that the Glenn Greenwalds of the world say that FISA is adequate as it is now. And many civil libertarians like Julian Sanchez agree with him. But Barack Obama disagrees, and most of the rest of the Washington Consensus agrees that there is a specific change that is needed, and that as long as this NSA program is signed off on, the filtering mechanisms by the FISA court, that it should be allowed. And I guess my question is, is it your position? Are you with the Glenn Greenwalds, Dennis Kucinich's, Julius Sanchez, that say that this NSA program by itself, as it is approved of by the FISA court, are you against that as well?
Well, first of all, I want to be clear. Are you saying you have the Washington Beltway consensus on your side? Is that what you said?
Well, there's a Washington Post editorial out today saying that the NSA program, as it is now, is necessary. So when it comes to, I'm not leaving aside the telecom.
Sure, we can. Yeah, I think it's logical to break out the issues. I'm just warning you, Conn. You're not going to win over a lot of people by saying you have Washington and the editorial boards and the lobbyists on your side there.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to find out, where your opinion is. Do you are you with the Glenn Greenwalds, the Dennis Kucinich's, and Julian Sanchez who say
let's do this. First of all, I think Glenn has done tremendous work on this as an attorney and an author. As for my position, which, yes, let's get to it, I've written about this for a very long time. I've written op-eds and whatnot early on opposing both the Protect America Act and the FISA Amendments Act as written. I'm obviously strongly, and have written as such, a supporter of aggressive counterterrorism measures and of a spying regime that uses warrants and uses the FISA court and has strong oversight within the United States. So to boil that down to the FISA Amendments Act, yes, I support the provisions that help ensure that U.S. to foreign communications can be surveilled and that deal with some of the technological changes, the router fix that has been discussed.
So just to be clear,
but I'm answering I'm going to give a full answer, and then I will take any clarifications, and then I can ask you questions. But of course, the bill does more than that, and it gives new powers and discretion to the Attorney General to certify surveillance. It lengthens the period of warrantless surveillance, and it does what many experts call vacuum cleaner surveillance. And the problem, as you well know, is the more loopholes and Attorney General sign-offs and non-oversight, non-judicially scrutinized surveillance you have, the more abuse you tend to get. And that's not a partisan point. A lot of people think Barack Obama is going to win this thing and he's going to be the one wielding these new powers for the next several years. And I think Barack Obama would make a great president, and I like him and I trust him. However, even though that many people think is likely, I don't think as a structural, procedural matter, we should give that much authority to the executive branch. And I think if you look in the past, both Republican and Democratic presidents have abused surveillance powers to undermine democracy, to stifle dissent, to collect blackmail on people ranging from Martin Luther King to reporters and congressional aides. So these are very serious issues rooted in a recent history of abuse going back to the Church Committee. So it's not just to sit in the abstract and say, well, do you think we should spy? Yes, I think, of course, that's an integral part of our security operations. But I think we should do it within the rule of law. And this is the larger point. We have an administration that, according to one federal district court, violated the Fourth Amendment, to your earlier point, and broke the FISA statute in conducting surveillance warrantless without involving any other branch of government, without getting the authority. And as you say, they want to make this switch precisely because they were doing it a different way, which means we basically have an admission that they were breaking the law previously, and instead of Congress stepping in and addressing that, they're looking to shield companies involved with the immunity, as we said, we could discuss that as a separate issue, and provide validation of the larger program, so we'll never get to the bottom of some of these prior abuses. That's what I think is so concerning.
2 points. One, so you disagree with Glenn that the current FISA law as written is adequate. You agree that there are necessary changes that need to be made to bring this law into the 21st century.
Well, let's speak precisely. At a minimum, I think that the router change regarding foreign-to-foreign communication and foreign-to-U.S. communication can be modernized without doing a lot of the other stuff I mentioned. Yes, I think that.
Okay. And so would you say that the vacuum warrants are a necessary part of that modernization or not?
I don't think the broad vacuum surveillance or kicking out preemptive spying, where you put the tap down, you have many days to do that, and they lengthen the time for doing that, and then going to the court afterward. Those kind of changes, I don't think, are wise, especially given the records we have here. In other words, what we've seen, the abuse thus far. No.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess we just, have a disagreement there.
Now, let me ask you one. Although my question for you, and my question for any honest conservative about these issues, because you can disagree about the substance. In other words, if we take this as a question of what kind of police-state security structure do you want, and how much government do you want unbridled in your home, in your papers, in your business? That's a substantive question. Then there's a more basic question about the rule of law here, and whether you're a law and order conservative or not, which is, as you say, they needed these changes, they haven't been made. That's, I think, one of the reasons you support the bill, and yet they've been doing this spying. So would you acknowledge that they were spying in violation of the law for several years here?
So the question is do I think that they were violating FISA?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, they brought in, what's her name, James Harmon, and the rest of the House Select Intelligence Committee, and told them from day one after 9/11 what they were doing, and the House Democrats signed off on it. And the FISA law was inadequate. So after 9/11, they issued this program, which technically violated FISA, which we both admitted needs to be updated, fixed to match the 21st century. And because that fix hadn't been done yet, and Congress is very, very slow, they went ahead and did it to protect our security. And so do I think they should have gone to Congress sooner to get a legal fix to it? Yes, I think they definitely moved too slow after informing Congress to get a legislative fix to FISA. But on 9/12, would I want them to institute this program in technical violation of FISA? Yes, I would. And I guess this goes to your rhetoric about the government coming into our homes and business papers, etc., which is just totally out of whack, which is what this program actually does, which is try to filter email flow traffic to see which communications are really foreign to foreign, which communications are foreign to some of the United States, so that the NSA can then take the foreign to foreign ones and read those as they are allowed to do by FISA.
Then do you think the president then can simply break a law, as you say, for security? Can he do that any time at his own discretion, 9/12, 9/13, or 2 years later? I mean, what doctrine are you providing? John McCain, by the way, of course, has said something similar. I don't know how many of your colleagues at the Heritage Foundation think this. It is an outrageous, ridiculous, and unprecedented position that it's Nixonian. The president can break a law when he decides, and then when he or she decides, and then it's not breaking the law, or there's no consequences. How do you
there are definitely
principle?
Consequences, and Dennis Kucinich has put that consequence into motion. if the country thinks that President Bush erred and that it was not responsible to do the very limited breaking of FISA in order to filter these emails so that they could extract the true foreign-to-foreign ones, and if that was such a fundamental violation of the law that the country would not sanction it by any protection of security, then you can impeach the president, which Dennis Kucinich has put forward. And
but short of impeachment, you don't believe there's any other consequence for a criminal act by the president or the White House?
As laid down by the statute, I mean, FISA doesn't, set down specific fines for the president. It does for the telecommunications company, and it's a separate issue of whether they relied on the justifications and the authority of the president when they went along with it.
So, and you would apply that, I presume, to rendition or torture, or in this case we have a telephone company conducting surveillance, allegedly illegal, found by one federal district court, although, of course, later
overturned.
A higher court overturned on standing, so they didn't quite get to the substantive issues. Important to note that in terms of legal limbo and really in both directions. But if the president asked a different, say, set of companies and authorized them to illegally torture or rendition people abroad or start illegally executing Americans or detaining people without trial, and there's a private company involved, all of that's fair game, and the only idea you're putting forth to rein that in would be impeachment, not our normal functioning Justice Department and rule of law?
Well, for each of those cases, it would depend on what they did. If President Bush, authorized the FBI to all of a sudden storm down people's doors, that would be, as opposed to FISA, an actual violation of the Fourth Amendment, and there would be a whole slew of other things to do against him. So, we have to get to the specifics here of each case, and you can't just say blanketly, oh, you're for the president doing anything. No, it depends on what the president did. It's entirely both. So,
are your views going to be the same, I guess, if you have a Democratic president?
I am fine with the Barack Obama administration conducting the same vacuum NSA sorting of emails that the current President Bush administration is doing. Yes.
And do you think your conservative friends are going to be the same?
Well, not the Bob Barrs of the world who became libertarians, but most of them, yeah. I mean,
that is. I think there's very little that's happening here that will make, I think, in the eyes of history, that will make the people supporting these measures look good. I think the Democrats will ultimately be seen, even in the waning days of a lame duck, terribly unpopular president, for excesses like this. The Democrats will be judged, I believe, personal opinion, to have caved once again and to have really shirked their duties. The Republicans and the conservative leadership here, if anything, even more complicit, never standing up to their president, never looking for any course correction on Iraq, on foreign policy, on the constitutional issues, or any limited government. So this is my question for you, though. I know you don't like some of these judgments, but
it's the broadening of the issues that I'm objecting to.
Fair enough. I actually think, as if people watch Chris Dodd's speech, it's very important to look at them in this larger context of criminality and not let each scandal and each criminal accusation be atomized and isolated, because there's a larger set of criminal acts by this administration that are very concerning. But my larger point for you is, well, that, I think, reflects poorly on a lot of the actors involved, including people that I am generally very favorable towards. I am struck by how so much of this is happening when we could have a Democratic administration next. And so I wonder, what's your take on that in your conversations at Heritage or conservative bloggers and other people? Is anyone worried that they're granting too much power to a potentially Democratic administration?
On what front? I mean, you're going to have to be specific. I mean,
on spying.
On what?
On surveillance.
On FISA specifically? No.
And why do you think that is?
Because as this bill is crafted and as this is set up, the NSA designs a program. They then give it to the FISA court, who then approves the procedures of this program. And so there's oversight from them, and then the NSA implements the program. And there's been no evidence that this administration, or of course the next administration, that doesn't exist, is using this to unfairly target people the way Nixon and other administrations did.
Well, how would we have evidence of that when Congress doesn't do strong subpoena-based investigations, and the court is...
Congress can do all those. No one's stopping Henry Waxman from investigating this.
Well, you have administration officials refuse to testify about a host of issues, and the civil suits are being stopped. So the evidence isn't going to come if we don't have ways to get it, right?
That's true. I mean,
right.
I mean, you just had a court yesterday in San Francisco throw out a suit by a Islamic charity in Oregon because the documents of this program were state secret. So, I mean, really, it just shows how this telecom issue is really a red herring, because in all likelihood, the groups that are pushing this the lawsuit are never going to get discovery to find out what these the protocols for this NSA program are, because courts are, in all likelihood, Marty Lederman's written on this, Jack Balkin, the courts are probably going to say, not 100% chance, but good 75, 80% chance that you can't get these documents because it's a state secret, because it is national security what the NSA's program for sorting emails is.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned it. I think that's true. These studies have shown the Bush administration invokes the state secrets privilege more than any other administration in history. It can preempt judicial oversight. Of course, there are legitimate state secrets that shouldn't necessarily be litigated in open court. A lot of people can agree on that premise. But again, a question of whether they have abused it and why they have invoked it so many more times and so much more expansively. And that brings us back, as I think, to, I mean, again, we define the issues differently, but to the larger question of the rule of law and what we do when we have a president defy Congress, break the law, get rebuked, by the way, on other issues like Guantanamo repeatedly by a conservative Supreme Court, and then continue to conduct this kind of activity outside the rule of law. We have a breakdown here. And it's a breakdown, I think, that, as you mentioned Washington earlier, for some reason Washington, D.C. and a lot of the commentariat there has missed this. But we have a breakdown when a conservative Supreme Court goes back for the third time rebuking this president on his detention policies, but very little changes down in Guantanamo, very little changes with regard to torture and rendition, very little changes with regard to spying. If anything, Congress has gotten in on the act, just as they did with the Military Commissions Act in trying to cleanse what the Supreme Court and many Republican-appointed led Supreme Courts said just would not fly. It was unconstitutional detention. And so the question, I think the larger question is, what do we do about all this? And I'm very concerned as a citizen. I think this is a paramount issue. After foreign policy and economy, to me it's the biggest issue in the election, and it's as important as anything, is what do we do about this breakdown of the rule of law? And so I guess you define it differently. As I understand you don't agree with my premise.
I don't think there's a breakdown of the rule of law.
So then you don't have a concern about what to do about it, and you don't care that they invoke secrecy to stop these cases. We don't have the evidence. We don't know what's going on. There's a real black box quality here where if there were worse things that you say would, I guess in your paradigm, be worthy of impeachment, we might never know about them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I just don't see, no one's been able to come up with an example of how someone's privacy was violated by this NSA program. I mean, I would say one thing. When I was in law school, I actually wrote a paper about the administration's detainee treatment, and very similar with FISA. I faulted the administration with not going to Congress soon enough to get the changes necessary. After 9/11, we had a new era of conflict in which we were fighting non-state actors. So a lot of the rules that we had before just weren't as operable as they were before. And just like in FISA, I would fault the Bush administration in FISA and on detainee treatment for not going to Congress soon enough to get the law changed so that they could bring their necessary actions into law. So did they act fast enough? No, definitely not. Is that a worry? Yes. Is Bush being punished for it? Yes. But on the how? Well, his approval rate in the 20s. He's a lame duck president. His party is suffering enough so that John McCain has George Bush as a anvil around his neck.
Politically, yes, you're right. I 100% agree politically. But within our system of government, how is he and his administration facing any reaction for this? If anything, when Congress does find out that they've been duped, that they and the public have been deceived, they rush to attempt to validate these items, and sometimes unsuccessfully so because they remain unconstitutional.
Well, yeah, I guess that just come back to my early point that no one has really been able to prove, harms to civil liberties here. You're not going to get a public upset to punish the executive branch until there's actually any harm. And
well, look, again, I don't want to bog down too much because I think the audience has heard both of our sides, but part of that's because of the secrecy we've discussed, so it's hard to get the evidence. Part of that is false in the sense that we may not have individual victims provable because you're not going to get that through a Freedom of Information request, but we have information that suggests that hundreds of thousands of people have been surveilled, and we don't know how many have been scrutinized without warrants and where that information is gone. And again, to the larger civil liberties point, we had a president here who tried to invoke the power to detain American citizens without trial. And the court overruled that as well. But if you want to talk about civil liberties and freedom, he tried. Well, you and I have talked about that before, and I appreciate that you share concerns about that. But yes, there's definitely evidence that this approach, this larger approach to sidestepping and breaking the law in what the government calls its global war on terror, yes, has compromised civil liberties and freedom here of American citizens.
Well, like Justice Scalia, I was very much against the Bush asserting the right to hold American citizen without a charge, and the Bush administration lost that case, and they honored the court's decision, which seems to me that the rule of law is perfectly fine in this country. They took the case, they fought the case, they lost the case, and they honored the court's decision, which seems to me to be the definition of the rule of law. It's I don't get all swept up into this a great assault on the rule of law in this country when after each case the Bush case is lost, they've honored their case decision and moved to change their behavior.
Knowingly breaking the law and then waiting for the slow process of the Supreme Court to catch up with you, I don't agree it qualifies for that. And I don't think they needed, by the way...
Well, I don't think they always knowingly broke the law. I mean...
Not always, but I don't think you need, as you say, from studying these issues or reading basically an American high school textbook, I don't think you need a court to remind you that you can't detain an American citizen without trial, right?
Well, there were some other specific legal issues which, they ended up losing.
Which they got drubbed on. And the third Guantanamo case that we just had this term is another example where they kept trying to go back and invoke powers that the court said they didn't have. And I think part of that is because they just wanted to wield them with legal arguments sort of putatively protecting them as they continue to run a lawless prison down there.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you on the Boudinot decision, which no one seems to know how to pronounce, including me. Again, with Scalia on that one. But let's not get bogged down in that, because we have a whole other slate of Barack moving to the right.
We'll have to leave it here.
Right, which goes into more of your broader argument of Barack changing the message.
Yes.
So there's been a whole series of instances where Barack has moved to the right, not just on FISA. Glenn had a nice little list, so I'll go ahead and use his. Intervened in a Democratic congressional primary to support one of the worst Bush-enabling blue dogs over a credible progressive challenger. Announced his support for Bush's FISA bill, reversing himself completely on this issue, which, as I said, is not complete reversal. Sided with Scalia-Thomas faction in two highly charged Supreme Court decisions. Repudiated Wesley Clark and embraced the patently false media narrative that Clark has dishonored McCain's service. Condemned MoveOn.org for its newspaper advertisement criticizing General Petraeus. Defended his own patriotism by impugning the patriotism of others, specifically those in what he described as the so-called counterculture of the 60s, and finally unveiled plans to expand Bush's program steering federal social service dollars to religious groups, and a move sure to cause controversy, letting religious charities that receive federal funding consider religion in employment decisions. So that's Glenn's list of Obama's sins against the progressive movement in, I think, just the past week and a half.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with you, since
yes.
I was shooting my mouth off a lot. Do you think, on balance, this is working for his presidential prospects?
Yes. Because the headlines I'm seeing are all Obama moves to the center, Obama repudiates, the left wing. So just from the headlines I'm seeing, I think those are all good headlines for Obama.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have big concerns about some of those issues we just discussed, surveillance. I think the broader emphasis that he wants to show that he is not a caricature that the Republicans often make out Democratic candidates to be, that he's going to use his political capital that he's built up with his base and the left to now run a different kind of messaging going into the general election, particularly in the summer, where you can do a lot of targeted messaging because regular people don't pay a lot of attention to politics in July and August. So you can do targets to groups that care about certain issues, you try to keep your narrative going, and you suit up for the convention. Look, Barack Obama earned this position. He beat the odds, he beat the front runner, he beat the Clinton money machine. He knows what he's doing. And so I think on a lot of these issues rhetorically and how he emphasizes and which issues he's talking about, he's the candidate, he's the nominee. And so there has to be some understanding and deference to that. I think the larger question is whether it starts to look like a stereotype Democratic campaign where there's so much movement that people are able to persuasively say that they don't know where he stands. So he has to guard against emphasis. For example, the faith-based speech is an argument that he's, by the way, made before in other contexts, and he's elaborating on it in the general election. I don't have a problem with it. It's a question of what you prioritize. Surveillance and some of these other issues raise the question of where he stands, and so that's a line he has to walk. I actually think he's shown that he can walk these lines fairly well, but you can't move so much that people don't know where you are.
Yeah, I mean, Marcos had his post where he said he wasn't going to give money to Barack Obama's campaign this month because of all these moves to the right. But he said he still plans to vote for him, and he'll probably end up giving him the money later. And I guess politically, just speaking, will this help him in the election? That's where I think it will, because he loses nothing by moving to the right on these issues. The Marcoses of the world, the Glenn Greenwalds of the world, you haven't said this, but I guess the Ari Melbers of the world are still going to end up voting for Obama, no matter how far to the right he moves. And so he only has, he can only gain votes by this move. He can only, peel off evangelical voters. He can only, peel off people who thought he wasn't patriotic and people who sympathize with McCain. By distancing himself from Wes Clark and MoveOn.org. So it's just
glad you brought up Wes Clark. Sorry, go ahead. I want to go to Wes Clark when you're done.
All I was going to say is that it's all gain, no loss for him. So it's just, that's why I do think this helps him politically.
I should say, if they ever, Blind Heads, they cut up these into clips, and so I should stress that we're talking about the political imperative. Earlier we spoke at great length about the substantive and moral dimensions of some of these issues, which I think, of course, are more important. Politically, yeah, my analysis is not that far apart from you with regard to the general theme, and if this is portrayed as him being this reasonable mainstream candidate, all to the better. I don't think that you have to move to the right to be mainstream, especially in this political environment. But again, that's kind of an empirical question that his campaign can resolve. He earned this spot, and he's going to run, and, that's that. Wes Clark is a very different example to me, and it is exactly on the line where you can go haywire and end up doing this mistake that Democrats make where they think they have to defy everyone. Wes Clark is a four-star, defy their own supporters, defy the left. Wes Clark's a four-star general. He knows a great deal about military matters. He's been a presidential candidate. He's a persuasive communicator. And he's going out and making a factual point. A very simple one that's been made before, as I wrote on thenation.com. Jim Webb and others have discussed how your military service is and is not relevant to what you do in government as a politician or potentially as a policymaker as president. And that's a very basic point. And it was twisted, and people were lying about General Clark's service. People in the conservative media, and unfortunately often swallowed wholly by the mainstream media, were repeating a falsehood. And if you go back and look at what Wesley Clark said, he said he honors McCain's service, he thinks he's a hero, and in response to a question, the act of getting shot down, just like the valor that McCain showed when he was held and tortured, are respectable, but they don't directly pertain to the policy decisions you make as a president. I don't even think John McCain would disagree with that in a less heated campaign environment. And people mischaracterized that as Wesley Clark saying he disrespected or demean John McCain's service. Viewers know the rest of the deal. And the Obama campaign basically helped validate that falsehood by distancing Barack from Wes on that point. So I thought that was unfortunate. And that's an example where we're getting into rhetoric and strategy, but that's not moving to the center or moving to the left. That's a question of when do you decide you have to fight the narrative and you have to fight business as usual, where someone pushes something as a twisted, smear, or basically attacking Wes for something he didn't say. And you have to undermine the premise, not accept it on its frames. That's an area where I think the campaign, has to be really careful.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say that, reiterate my point that, it's no loss for him. He's not going to lose any voters by doing this. He only has those to gain. I would say that it might end up, hemming him in when he comes into office as to whether or not he can tack back left. But that'll come down to each of those specific issues. I mean, the larger point is that I think we're going to see more of this throughout the campaign, and the Netroots can talk a good game about holding Obama accountable on it, but until the Marcos of the world start saying, okay, not only am I not going to donate to him this month, I promise not to do it in the future, and I might not vote for him. Until the rhetoric gets to that level, I don't think you're going to see a change in behavior from the Obama campaign.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a very interesting. You're hitting on the core question, and you might be right. Change of behavior, as you put it, may not happen in the short run. But I do think we're moving towards, and this can be good for democracy, not just one party. We're moving towards this more sophisticated, networked activism. It's obviously ascended on the left, but the left is out of power and has some charismatic figures who've tapped this energy online. Some of it can also redound on the right. We saw that at least with Ron Paul's insurgent campaign. And what's happening, I think, is a different model that says, no, not every political issue boils down to a binary choice between do I have your vote or not, and if I do, I don't have to worry about you. And I think what's so exciting about some of the activism on the Obama side is that people are not being that simplistic. They're not talking about a nadir alternative or saying, well, now that I disagree with you on a certain issue, I could never support you. But rather, I want to make my voice heard. I want to have a stake in this campaign. The base is not just an ATM online for funding you. And we want to have a smart, real dialogue, even on issues where we disagree. So maybe Barack Obama is not going to further modify his surveillance position. But he can have a type of exchange with his supporters during the general election that really wasn't necessarily possible in the same way. And conservative bloggers who have regular calls with John McCain have an access point that is distinct from the political power structure, which we know in all situations is bounded by money and people who've put in 10 years and sort of restrictions that are somewhat unavoidable, or the media structure, which everyone has their complaints about. You have an alternative, I think, more grassroots structure. So it's good that McCain communes with conservative bloggers. It's good that Obama is being pressed. And it's not just in the context of do I have your vote or not, but will you be enthusiastic for me? Will you continue to be a part of the grassroots army for me, and all the other issues and ways that you can help a campaign? So I think it's actually kind of a better than just boiling everything down to, well, these votes are in the bag, so we don't care anymore.
Yeah, I mean, circling back to your article at the beginning, the interactive nature of both these campaigns, like you mentioned, the John McCain and the blogger calls and the My Obama sites, really stresses the fact that our next president will be the first one in the online community era. And yes, Bush is president now, but he was not elected and never had to deal with rapid feedback like that. I remember reading some Mark Amberter posts back when the Harriet Miers and immigration issues were hitting the Bush department, or were hitting the Bush administration. And, of course, on both of those issues, the online right just was really firing against the Bush administration on all cylinders. And Mark had some great anonymous quotes from the Bush administration people saying that they were just blindsided by how quickly the message came and just totally kneecapped them on those issues. Right. And, Bush was elected in a time when he didn't have to deal with that type of pushback from his own base. And he's the last president that's going to be able to say that. The next one, whether it's McCain or Obama, my money's on Obama, isn't going to be able to say that. They're going to be, they're going to have come to, they're going to have one election at a time when they do have to deal with instant feedback from the grassroots. And
it hits what you're saying on the conservative side hits on something also I think great for the larger thrust here, which is, the media has gotten in a mode of treating all politics like performance and strategy. So unfortunately, the gloss for that conservative pushback you mentioned, and for some of the liberal stuff we talked about earlier, the media gloss is, this is a political problem. They're not disciplined. They're not strategic about the general election. They might alienate the other folks that this candidate or president needs. That could apply to both situations. And citizens don't care. And that's good. It's good that citizens aren't saying, well, wait, if I'm criticizing this politician who I generally support over a really important issue, does that undermine their prospects? I mean, first of all, probably not, right, in the big scheme. So it's really positive to have honest conservatives who stand up to their politician, just like it is on the left. And I hope the media, the traditional media, finally gets hip to this and stops putting it in the context of, well, is this a discipline problem for the message? Like they're almost an adjunct to the campaign's desire to control artificially the way that the campaign will unfold, or to let it be the breathing, organic, wild thing that our politics should be, which is a whole bunch of voices, a whole bunch of opinions that aren't monolithic and aren't binary with regard to which candidate you support and then the other issues facing the country. I mean, that may sound obvious and idealistic, but if we can get people thinking in those terms and filter it back to people in that, I think, organic, honest way, then we can throw out all this crap about, well, wait a minute, does this hurt Obama in Ohio? Does this hurt, McCain in Pennsylvania? That's not the fundamental question. The fundamental question is, are we building the kind of interaction that augments democracy, not political strategy?
Well, I think it's a good note of agreement to end on, is that we both think the online mediums that allow more immediate feedback and interaction with candidates and politicians is good for the country. As you say, it may be idealistic, but I'm going to go ahead and agree with you there, and I think that's a good place to end it on this July 4th.
All right. Well, we started with a furious debate over American values, and we ended with some consensus. I agree. And I guess it's going to be up on Friday and the weekend, so, happy Independence Day to you and everyone out there watching.
Happy July 4th, Ari. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.